What is better for muscle protein synthesis? Taking whey protein with water or taking whey protein with glucose? This is one of the most common questions in gyms, bodybuilding circles, and sports nutrition discussions. Some people say whey with glucose is better because glucose spikes insulin, and insulin is anabolic. Others say whey protein alone is enough because amino acids, especially leucine, are what actually trigger muscle protein synthesis. So what does the research say? In this video, we are going to break this down using evidence from more than 20 research papers on whey protein, carbohydrate coingestion, insulin response, resistance training, endurance recovery, glycogen replenishment, and muscle protein synthesis. By the end, you will know when whey with water is enough, when adding glucose may be useful, and what actually matters most for muscle growth. Section 1. What is muscle protein synthesis? Muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, is the process where your body repairs and builds new muscle protein. After resistance training, your muscles become more sensitive to amino acids. When you consume high-quality protein, especially protein rich in leucine, muscle protein synthesis increases. Whey protein is one of the most effective proteins for this because it is fast digesting, rich in essential amino acids, and naturally high in leucine. This is why whey protein is commonly used after training. But the real question is not whether whey works. The real question is whether adding glucose makes whey work better for muscle protein synthesis. Section 2. The theory behind adding glucose. The argument for adding glucose is based on insulin. Glucose raises blood sugar. Blood sugar raises insulin. Insulin helps move nutrients into cells. So people assume that whey plus glucose must build more muscle than whey plus water. That sounds logical, but muscle protein synthesis does not work that simply. Insulin does play a role in muscle protein metabolism, but once insulin reaches a moderate level, more insulin does not necessarily mean more muscle protein synthesis. Whey protein alone already increases insulin to a meaningful degree. In many cases, that insulin response is already enough to reduce muscle protein breakdown and support an anabolic environment. So adding glucose may raise insulin even more, but the important question is, does that extra insulin actually increase muscle protein synthesis? Section 3. What the research shows. One of the most important studies on this topic looked at protein with and without carbohydrate after resistance exercise. The conclusion was very clear. When enough protein is consumed, adding carbohydrate does not further stimulate post-exercise muscle protein synthesis. In other words, if your whey protein dose is already sufficient, glucose does not appear to add extra muscle building benefit for MPS. Another review specifically asked whether carbohydrate is needed to further stimulate muscle protein synthesis after resistance exercise. The conclusion was that available clinical data does not support the idea that adding carbohydrate to protein further increases muscle protein synthesis when adequate protein is consumed. This is the key point. For muscle protein synthesis, whey protein with water is generally enough if the whey dose provides enough essential amino acids and leucine. Adding glucose may increase insulin, but that does not automatically mean more muscle protein synthesis. Section 4. When glucose may help. Now, this does not mean glucose is useless. Glucose and carbohydrates are very useful for glycogen replenishment. Glycogen is the stored carbohydrate in your muscles. If you do hard training, endurance work, multiple sessions per day, football, wrestling, MMA, CrossFit-style training, or long conditioning workouts, glycogen recovery becomes very important. Research shows that co-ingesting carbohydrate with protein after exercise can improve muscle glycogen repletion, especially when total carbohydrate intake is not high enough. So the answer depends on your goal. If your goal is muscle protein synthesis, whey with water is usually enough. If your goal is full recovery after hard training, especially glycogen recovery, whey plus carbohydrate can be useful. That is the difference most people miss. Section 5. Whey with water. Let's talk about whey with water. Whey with water is simple, fast, low-calorie, and effective. It gives your body amino acids quickly. It stimulates muscle protein synthesis. It is easy to digest for most people. It is useful during fat loss because you are not adding extra calories from glucose. It is usually the better choice if your only goal is lean muscle gain while controlling calories. For bodybuilding, powerlifting, or general gym training, if you are already eating enough carbohydrates in your diet, you probably do not need to add glucose to your whey shake. Your body does not need a huge insulin spike to build muscle from whey. It needs enough total protein, enough leucine, enough calories overall, progressive training, and recovery. Section 6. Whey with glucose. Now let's talk about whey with glucose. Whey plus glucose can be useful in certain situations. It may be useful after long or intense training. It may be useful if you train twice per day. It may be useful for athletes who need rapid glycogen replenishment. It may be useful for people who struggle to eat enough calories. It may be useful during bulking phases when additional carbohydrates fit the diet. But for pure muscle protein synthesis, glucose is not magic. If you add glucose to whey, you are mainly adding energy and supporting glycogen recovery, not necessarily increasing muscle protein synthesis beyond what adequate whey already does. Section 7. Does insulin build muscle? This is where the fitness industry often gets confused. Insulin is anabolic, but more insulin is not always better for muscle growth. Amino acids, especially leucine, are the main nutritional trigger for muscle protein synthesis. Insulin helps reduce muscle protein breakdown, but only a relatively modest insulin level is needed for this effect. Whey protein alone can create enough insulin response to support post-exercise anabolism. That is why adding glucose may not increase MPS when protein intake is already sufficient. Amino acid availability is the main driver. Section 8. What about small doses of whey? There is one important exception. Some research found that a small dose of whey protein combined with carbohydrate can stimulate muscle protein synthesis after resistance exercise. One study used 10 grams of whey protein with 21 grams of carbohydrate and showed a rise in MPS in trained young men. But this does not prove that glucose is better than a full serving of whey. It suggests that when protein dose is small, combining it with carbohydrate can still produce an anabolic response. However, if you take a more typical whey serving, such as around 20 to 40 grams, depending on body size and meal timing, the added glucose is less likely to provide extra MPS benefit. Section 9. Older adults and anabolic resistance. Older adults may need more attention to protein dose and leucine. With aging, muscles can become less responsive to smaller protein doses. This is sometimes called anabolic resistance. Research in older adults shows that high-quality whey protein and leucine-enriched supplements can increase post-meal muscle protein synthesis. But again, this supports the importance of protein quality and leucine, not necessarily glucose. For older adults, the priority should usually be sufficient high-quality protein per meal, resistance training, and total daily protein intake. Section 10. Practical comparison. Now let's compare both options directly. Whey with water. Best for muscle protein synthesis when protein dose is sufficient. Best for fat loss or lean gaining. Lower calories. Fast and simple digestion. No unnecessary sugar. Good for most gym goers, bodybuilders, and powerlifters. Whey with glucose. Best when glycogen replenishment is important. Useful after long, intense, or repeated training sessions. Useful for athletes doing football, MMA, wrestling, endurance work, or 2-a-day sessions. Adds calories, which can help during bulking. Not clearly better for muscle protein synthesis if enough whey is already consumed. Section 11. What should bodybuilders do? For bodybuilding, muscle protein synthesis is mainly driven by resistance training, total protein intake, leucine-rich protein, total calories, and consistency. If you are cutting, take whey with water. If you are lean bulking and need calories, whey with glucose or another carbohydrate source can help. If you already had a carb-containing meal before or after training, adding glucose to your shake is probably unnecessary. For most bodybuilders, whey with water is enough for MPS. Section 12. What should powerlifters do? For powerlifters, the goal is strength performance and recovery. If your training is heavy but not extremely long, whey with water is usually enough. If you do long sessions, high volume blocks, or train multiple times per day, Adding carbs may help performance and glycogen recovery. But again, glucose is not needed just to activate whey protein. Section 13. What should MMA, wrestling, and football athletes do? For combat sports and football, carbohydrate becomes more important because these sports use a lot of glycogen. Wrestling, MMA, and football involve repeated high-intensity efforts. If you are training hard, sweating heavily, doing conditioning, and practicing multiple times per day, whey plus carbohydrates can be a smart recovery strategy. But this is because of energy recovery and glycogen replenishment, not because glucose dramatically boosts whey protein synthesis. Section 14. What about diabetes or blood sugar issues? If someone has diabetes, insulin resistance, or blood sugar management problems, adding glucose to whey should not be done casually. Whey protein alone may already affect insulin and glucose response. Adding glucose can increase blood sugar load. People with blood sugar issues should speak with a qualified medical professional or registered dietitian before using glucose powders or high-sugar post-workout shakes. Section 15. The final answer. So, what is better for whey protein synthesis? Whey with water or whey with glucose? For muscle protein synthesis specifically, whey protein with water is usually enough when the protein dose is adequate. Adding glucose does not appear to significantly increase muscle protein synthesis beyond adequate protein. However, whey with glucose can be useful for athletes who need faster glycogen recovery, more calories, or recovery from long and intense training sessions. So the correct answer is, for muscle protein synthesis, whey with water is enough. For glycogen recovery and high-volume athletic training, whey with glucose can be useful. For fat loss, whey with water is better. For bulking, whey with glucose can be used if it fits your calories. For general muscle growth, total protein, training, calories, and consistency matter more than adding glucose. Section 16. Simple rule. Here is the simple rule. If you train once per day and eat enough carbs in your regular diet, take whey with water. If you train very hard, do endurance or combat sports, train twice per day, or need rapid recovery, whey with glucose or another carb source can help. But do not think glucose makes whey magically more anabolic. The real muscle building signal comes from resistance training plus sufficient high-quality protein. Conclusion: the fitness industry often loves complicated formulas, but the science is more practical. Whey protein works because it provides essential amino acids, especially leucine. Glucose can help recovery, especially glycogen recovery, but it is not required to maximize muscle protein synthesis when protein intake is already adequate. So if your goal is muscle growth, focus on the basics. Train hard. Eat enough total protein. Hit your calories. Sleep well. Recover properly. And use carbs strategically based on your training demands. If you found this video helpful and want more science-based fitness and nutrition breakdowns, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.